We're in conversation with Sudha Bharadwaj, a lawyer, and more than that, an activist who's worked for rights of tribal communities and labor workers in Chhattisgarh. Bharadwaj was teaching at the prestigious National Law University, Delhi, at the time of her arrest as part of the probe into the Elgar Parishad case of 2018. After 3 years of incarceration, Bharadwaj is the first amongst the 16, now 15, to get default bail. Ma'am, let me just begin by asking, how are you adjusting to a life in a whole different city?
City. Well, yes, I mean, it is a very new city for me, a little alien. Um, I, but it is a city of working people. So, Kamkaji Sheher, I would say. So, I find it maybe a little expensive in terms of rent, etc. But very efficient. It's a very efficient city. People are going about their work and their business all the time. And that's nice to see.
So, ma'am, what is your plan of action now?
Well, I would have loved to teach, but I very much I very seriously doubt that, with the stigma of a case like this, that I would get a teaching position. What I'm thinking at the moment is that I would like to, if possible, get back into practice. The two things which I'm thinking of is one is working with unions for labor matters. Though, in the time that we've been in jail, even the labor codes have changed, and I think a lot of adjustment is required to think of, legal remedies and how to go about things now. The other thing is that when I was in jail, I met a lot of prisoners who were really in quite a helpless condition. So I would like to do as much as I can to help. And as far as I've understood here, if I have a local lawyer along with me on my wakalatnama, I should be able to begin. So a low level practice, but yes, I'd like to do that. But I also have to think about how to earn my living. So I don't expect this so that is another thing I have to look out for, maybe some kind of, research or writing or.
Do you miss Chhattisgarh?
Oh,
Practice
yes,
there.
very much. Very much. Because I first went to Chhattisgarh in 1983, and then since 1986, I've been continuously there. So it's 35 years of association now. And I'm very familiar. I worked as a trade unionist before I became a lawyer. And so all my, years in the industrial areas, in the labor camp, and then after that, about 15 years of practice in the High Court. So I also remember my colleagues there, and the language, the festivals, so I have a lot of friends there, a lot of activists, and a lot of clients who have all been phoning me up ever since I've come out, and they've got my phone number. So I have to keep telling them, I'm sorry, I can't do anything now. So many clients have been phoning me up.
As someone who's worked tirelessly to provide the best possible legal aid to persons in dire need of it, what is your take on the legal aid that was being provided to prisoners who could not afford it?
Well, I was in Baikala in a period where the issue of legal aid became very acute, because that was the Corona period. And if you remember, that is the period when the mulakats have stopped, people are not being taken to court. And even for the lawyers, I mean, just taking a cab, you couldn't come in trains, you have to take cabs and go to the courts, and maybe that was too expensive for legal aid lawyers. So basically, for people who are on legal aid in that period, I mean, that 2 years is like a pause in their history. I mean, nothing was happening. So that was a really bad time. And so that accentuated the general problems which are there in legal aid anyway, but they became very acute in that period. So, whether, there were so many women there who, first of all, could not contact their lawyer at all. Many of them didn't even have the information. They didn't have the mobile numbers, they didn't have the addresses. And then many of them were in a period when the charge sheet was supposed to be, filed, and there was no charge sheet, and they couldn't apply for default bail, which is a very precious right, as I know, because I am out on a default bail. So, those precious rights were being lost in that period. And then there were people who were undergoing hospitalization, who were, deliveries, miscarriages, and their lawyers knew nothing about what was going on with them. and that could not be brought before the court. So yeah, but that was a period where I made a lot of applications. I must say the jail tried its best. A lot of interim bail applications were forwarded, but unfortunately the maybe it was the wording in the high power committee order which said that it should not be treated as automatic and so on. So because there was nobody to argue out the prisoner's side, it was being treated more or less like a bail on merits, and so many of them were just rejected. Even I've written applications of women with HIV and TB and asthma and comorbidities, and very elderly women also, but couldn't get much relief for them. Yeah.
So
So I
any
really thought that, particularly in these times for a legal aid lawyer, the communication and the accountability to the client is so important. And for that, they really need to be better paid, better equipped. It's a problem also with the structure of the way legal aid is, given. Yeah.
Any advice for legal aid lawyers or students who aspire to get into legal aid services?
Well, what I noticed, I mean, I just taught for 1 year, but I had very many bright students. I'm quite convinced that a lot of students would like to go into legal aid, but the whole question is one of supporting yourself, because the kind of remuneration which a legal aid lawyer gets is so paltry that really you cannot do a very good job. And then ultimately your loyalty is to the system and not to the client at all. And so this is one thing which I think all of us need to fight for. And particularly, like, for example, I mean, I always joke with people that, you go to any high court, in the High Court of Chhattisgarh, I remember, there's this huge AG office, and, the AG and the deputy AG and the assistant AG, and there's so many government leaders. Everybody's on the rolls. So for the citizen, for the state, you have so many people on the rolls. But what about for the citizen? Okay, the whole idea of legal aid is to balance the issue of the citizens not being able to defend themselves properly. So you need equally well paid lawyers. And I'm sure even if a reasonable payment starts for legal aid lawyers, a lot of young people who otherwise are being forced to go into firms and so on will come to litigation and will come to legal aid. I think there are many young people who are very idealistic at the time when they join, but they have student loans to pay back. They don't want to be dependent on their parents anymore. They need to earn something, and they end up not prioritizing legal aid. So I think we need as students and as lawyers to fight for a better legal aid system. And once people join legal aid, I think there are a few things which we must take very seriously. That it should be mandatory once you take a wakalatnama as a legal aid lawyer that you at least have one meeting with the client. You must know their side of the story. It might be quite different from what is in the charge sheet. They might maybe so many things that you don't know, or which have not been mentioned, or which and nobody knows the facts better than the client. I mean, that is one thing that we should always remember. And then, when the charge sheet comes, many of the women in prison were illiterate, or they didn't know Marathi language. And often they don't, so for them to defend themselves, you have to meet them, you have to explain to them. And you should also be in very close communication with them, because if there's a problem in their family, there's a death in the family, there's some child outside has fallen ill, or this person is being hospitalized, these things must be brought before the court, which is a custodian, and that is your job as a legal aid lawyer. And many times what we have found is, particularly the pre-trial part, or the legal aid lawyers are not able to pay attention to them and don't pay attention to them. We really need to take that very, very seriously. I think a lot of miscarriage of justice happens because of this. So I do hope many more people go into legal aid, and I do hope, I'm even contemplating filing a PIL for improving the legal aid facilities, and including the remuneration for lawyers. Because if we don't have effective legal aid, then to say that constitutionally we are providing this, we fall very short of the mark of proper representation.
You had mentioned in an interview earlier, which was also with Bar and Bench, that there is a Kagas ki ladai and Sadak ki ladai. Do you still believe in that?
Very much so. Because I think, you know, change comes about both with social movements and with legal precedents. Now, sometimes you may have a very progressive legal precedent. I mean, the decriminalization of, for example, the 377, for example. But it's not being reflected in the practice of people in the society. Or you might have something, regarding honor killing or caste discrimination or something. Legal precedent alone is not enough. On the other side, I mean, sometimes they're very important social movements, but because they don't have a legal backing, they're not able to make headway, and that is not that doesn't become part of established law or established precedent or whatever. So I think both of them are very important, and this I've noticed in trade unionism. This I've noticed. So many laws have come about as movements. I mean, for the right to information came about like that. The forest rights came about like that. Most of the labor laws actually come from a century-long struggles of the working class. Gradually, laws were brought on the statute book. Laws protecting women all came from the women's movement. So, and the other way around as well. So, we need to I think we need to have both. And I have been fortunate to be associated with both. Of course, now I don't think I can be associated with because I'm so far away from Chhattisgarh. So I feel as if I have just one arm. Yeah.
Can you share what kind of advice did inmates ask for? Any particular incident you remember?
Well, I used to be asked for a lot of advice. People were quite lost when it came to legalese. Many times they would not understand what they were charged with. They would find it difficult to understand their charge sheet. And you see, the notion of justice and law are quite different things. Sometimes it's not translatable. So something which a person thinks is very unjust might be perfectly legal. And something which is, I remember a case when somebody was telling me this long story about, their land being acquired and all that. And I was listening to it. They found it very unjust, but I knew it was all very legal. And then I asked them, did you get a notice? And they said, no. And I was so happy. And they said, Acha, how does that matter? I said, well, it has become illegal now. What was unjust has now become illegal. So anyway, so in the prison also, you had these situations, and I mean, one thing I used to be very worried about used to be the people who were mentally ill, for example. Now, I think the fact that they were charged with very serious offenses, and that there is a whole chapter in the CRPC which has to deal with accused of unsound mind, and how does a person who doesn't have a legal aid lawyer, who doesn't have family to help them and so on, and who's in the jail, and who as a person is at the moment not really understanding what is happening with them, and also because they're mentally not in a good condition, maybe they provoke people and people fight them, and then they get beaten up, and then they were treated very harshly by even the prison authorities. How does that person actually get to the point when they are able to tell the court that, look here, I'm a person of unsound mind, now you please treat me under a different chapter of the CRPC? How is that ever going to happen? I used to feel very worried about those kind of cases. There were 3 or 4 such women in the entire period when I was in Baikala. There was one who used to become very violent and aggressive, and she had to be, chained in a separate cell and all that. And, though they were sent to the mental asylum and all, I don't know whether that would be any better. But, I really felt that something, really had to be done to get them out of that misery, and also so that they would be represented in court better. I really don't have a solution to that, except again that, the legal aid lawyers have to put in a lot of effort,
Was Sierra a better equipped prison than Baikala prison?
Well, in Yerwada, actually, I didn't get a chance to interact with many prisoners because we were there. We were in the Fasi yard. We were in separate cell in the Fasi yard. So actually, we were not allowed to communicate.
Okay.
Of course, some communication automatically happens when you're taken to the court and you sit in the same lockup, or you go to fill water and you come to know people's cases, or you go for a mulakat and other people are having mulakat. So I never really was able to, in detail, speak with anybody. Um, but as such, Yerwada is a central jail. It had more, I mean, it's more a convict jail than an under trial jail. Baikala is more an under trial jail. So the compound was much more beautiful, and it was a very old jail. And because it's a convict jail, there are people who have been there for a much longer time, and there's a factory there where you can go to work. Also, the time period we were there was not corona, and I think the Yerwada jail used to take much more efforts to bring in NGOs, and though most of the programs were related to religious functions and so on, but still there was some scope of entertainment or some scope of diverting one's mind, which was more there in Yerwada. Yes, that we did see.
Were there any life lessons that you learned in the 3 years in prison?
Oh, yes. See, outside I used to be very, very busy as a lawyer, as a social activist. I think when you go to jail, you understand what being alone is. So I think, at least for me, it was good. I learned to look after myself. So my diabetes came under control, and though it was very overcrowded, but I used to still find a little bit of time and place to do some exercise. And yeah. The other thing which I saw was, people around me were so much less fortunate. They didn't have friends outside helping. They couldn't understand what was happening with the case. They didn't have lawyers. So I found, that people have so many different ways of coping. Somebody, prays, somebody does needlework, somebody, helps other people. They all have coping mechanisms, and there's a lot to learn. I mean, from each and every prisoner, you can learn something. So I think that was another thing which I learned to do. And
What did you do to stay abreast with legal developments while in prison?
Well, after a little bit of effort, the time when we were really starved of information was when the newspapers were not coming. But when the newspapers would come, we would read it cover to cover. And of course, in the jail, you don't know how eagerly people wait for legal developments, how eagerly they wait. And of course, they misrepresent them totally. Are Didi, has the Supreme Court said everybody should be released? Hang on, hang on. Supreme Court has not said everybody should be released. Supreme Court has said, no, but they've said, na, they've said, please listen, there's a lot of qualifications, and it's not as easy as all that. But they really used to wait. And this I saw when in the Aryan Khan case, the TV was on the whole time, and nothing has even been found on him. You'd be surprised the amount of information about criminal law, about their cases, which, just from, surely discussing with each other. Of course, there was some very hilarious, I remember this lady coming up and saying, Didi, my High Court has given time bomb in my case. I said, time bomb? Oh, time bound. Right. You've got a time bound case. Fine. Okay. So, they grapple with it. They really grapple with it. The TV used to be on, but not usually to news, mostly to silly serials. But yes, legal news is followed very much. And we were lucky that we had, very attentive and good lawyers. So we managed to, and I would request my lawyers, and, I got copies of other UAPA judgments and so on and so forth. I remember another co-accused gave me a copy of the Pegasus judgment. So yes, we did try to keep abreast, and yeah. So it was of course, so many things were happening. I mean, between the farm laws and the labor codes and 370 and so many things about which one would have really liked to know what was going on. But yeah, and So we did try. We made an effort to keep abreast, yes.
Have the 3 years in prison given you a different perspective about your fight against injustice?
Well, yes, because I think, you see, I was very closely associated with the working class, being a trade unionist. And later on, because of land acquisition, I became quite close to farmers and Adivasis who were protesting land acquisition and environmental. So I'd been there. I knew what it looked like. This being in jail actually told me the plight of the under trials. And particularly, I am quite passionate at the moment about legal aid for the under trials. I really like to do something about it. At least as long as I'm in Mumbai, I would very much like, and I hope I'm given an opportunity to do that. I'd very much like to do that. Yes.
You got a law degree much later in life after having advocated for workers' rights for over 15 to 16 years. Did you ever want to become a judge at any point?
Well, because you see, I came as a lawyer, as you said. I mean, I was 40 when I became a lawyer. Well, fortunately, at that time, we were allowed to. I think now the Bar Council regulations don't even allow you to become a lawyer that late in life, which is foolish because at any stage, people should be allowed to be educated in law. And in fact, a person who's gone through other kind of experiences knows exactly what they want to do as a lawyer. So I came because I wanted to be a lawyer for the workers. So I never, I never took up thought of the bench as a career option. Like, young people give the examinations for a sessions judge or for a magistrate. Never did that. Of course, at some point when I became a lawyer in the High Court, the Chief Justice, Mr. Yatindra Singh, he was very kind and he once called me and he actually asked me if I'd like to be on the other side. Um, but I thanked him. I told him I felt very honored. But I really felt that, the kind of efforts which it takes to be a lawyer for those who maybe don't have any documentation, who are, unable to access things. I really felt that, so much effort has to be done. And somehow I felt as if I would be deserting all my poor and, clients who don't have the access by going on the other side. So I told him very politely that, sir, to give justice, I think they need to be good people on both sides. So I would prefer to remain a lawyer. Thank you. Yes.
This is out of curiosity, but as someone who has an opportunity to work in US, how did you resist that temptation?
Well, actually, I got the citizenship by fluke, the American citizenship. I simply was born there. So and nothing I achieved. And I came back at the age of 1 year. And then again, my mother took me with her to Cambridge, to England. So I was in England till the age of 11 or so. I had the choice to make at the age of 21. At that time, I don't know if you're aware, but this dual citizenship concept was also there. But at the age of 21, one would take a decision generally. By that time, I had already got quite involved with workers' issues and so on and so forth. And I remember at that time, we were supposed to go and register with the foreign registration office and tell them where you're going and what you're doing and if you're going to be out. And somehow I felt that, in my own country, I'm, trying to do something for my own people in my own country. And, to be informing this foreign, to be informing the American embassy what I'm doing all the time. I mean, it sounded so ridiculous. And somehow I had already made up my mind. I think that I would more or less be devoting my life to social work. So I thought it would be more of a hindrance. I never thought of it seriously as an option. So it was not a sacrifice, really. I thought that I would be much more comfortable. I felt Indian. I wanted to be stay in India. I wanted to work in India. So what was the point of having it? I just gave it up.
Lucky for us.
We've reached the end of our interview. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out the time to speak with Bar and Bench again.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon.